We do a really good job of trying to work with people before we commit to doing a big tutorial, only because we don't want it to be a failure. Some of the big tutorials, there's big production. Elia Licardi, we pitched him this idea. He actually pitched it to us, photographing the world. And I said, well, we have to go around the world. You can't just teach landscape photography, here in Puerto Rico or his backyard. We have to go around the world. And so you just want to make sure you're working with people that you enjoy working with and that they're capable of, speaking on camera and doing all of that. But one of the biggest challenges that we have, and I think what makes what we do so good, is Lee and I are very good at simplifying and boiling it down. And we've gotten in a lot of arguments with really well-known photographers where I say, you can't just start with this crazy setup. Like you need to show what doesn't work and what you don't, what things you don't like that a lot of people do. Maybe you're shooting on a on-camera flash just to show why it looks bad, and they get really upset and they're like, I can't, like, why would anyone do that? They're so far beyond where most people are in their thought process. It's kind of like I was talking about the masterclass with Carlos Santana, and I haven't seen it, but when I watch the previews for it, I just think you almost want him to do something so dumbed down that if you are just getting into lead guitar playing, you would understand, like, oh, I should not approach it that way if I want to sound like you.
Yeah.
But what he's probably talking about is so deep and it's so nuanced that it's almost like it's hard to really learn from him because he's so great in the grand. I've heard this about Ann Leibowitz's tutorial. I haven't watched it.
Hers was very kind of not in the weeds. It was in the clouds for sure.
Right. So she's probably, again, I haven't seen it. I've actually never, besides some creative lives where I tune in to watch some of my friends that are live at that very moment, I have never watched anyone else's tutorial. I don't think I've ever watched one of yours. I mean, I've watched the ones you've done with us, and I've watched segments of stuff, if something's free on YouTube, but I've never sat down and watched somebody else's tutorial. So in a way, maybe I'm missing out on that. And another way, it's kind of allowing us to create the vision that we strictly have without trying to be anything that we're not. And so that's one of the most difficult things, is to say, hey, we need you to do all of this other stuff before you get to the final image. Because if you just show up with 5 soft lighters and throw them around the room, like, that doesn't help anybody. We need you to build everything up, and we need you to explain what it's doing and why this thing that seems insignificant is so significant to your work. And I think the more successful a photographer is, the harder it is to coach that out of them. And so that's the most frustrating thing. But then when I'm all said and done and I'm editing it later in, Premiere, that's where I feel like we did a really good job. We really hold that out of the photographer, and everything makes logical sense. For someone who may have just picked up a camera for the first time, it may still be way beyond what they're capable of doing, and it may be intimidating, but at least you don't feel like you're just in the clouds immediately and you're like, that was, I have nothing to learn from that,
Yeah. Do you find it interesting that I genuinely feel like it's the conflict? Because I know in those moments there is conflict. In those moments there is a very palpable sense of discomfort on set, but it's in that conflict is where you actually get to a better product. But it kind of like, in my book that I've written, I argue that conflict is a necessary piece of every relationship.
Right.
And I feel like that's why these other tutorials, like nobody's going to sit down and tell Ann Leibovitz how she should teach photography. Nobody. Like, I don't care, like, how, like a director who, you could put Michael Bay and sit him down and say, Ann Leibovitz, you need to, like, he's not even going to be able to be like, have the confidence to say, you know what, Ann, I really think that you should do it this way. And this is what yields to me masterclass and those types of pieces of content that are, edutainment. That's why it remains edutainment, because these people are speaking at such a high level. It's in the clouds. They're speaking at such a high level that the only people that can understand is the people that are on that level, or at least close to that level. Whereas what you're creating is essentially this bridge of the two things. And that's what I wanted to bring to everybody's attention, is the the amount of kind of conflict that goes in behind the scenes to get this person to actually say the things that make the videos that much more valuable, because not only do you get that in the clouds high level kind of overview, but then you get the down in the weeds. This is the nuts and bolts of how we do it. So,
and I think a big part of that is genuinely being friends with the people that you work with. You know, like you and I have produced a few things. Like we've never done like a wedding tutorial or anything. We've done some very simple stuff. But like Mike Kelly is a great example. He's back here he's here in Puerto Rico for the first time. We've produced several tutorials with him. We are genuinely good friends. And so when we've produced his first tutorial, which I think is our best selling tutorial ever, it's intro to architectural real estate. It's like a real estate tutorial. It still outsells anything else that we've ever produced. But when we did that, you know, Mike was kind of hitting the stride of his career. And here we're telling him to really, like, you can't use tilt shift lenses, at least not initially. You can't use these super expensive lights. You have to use stuff that people have access to. And I remember we got in some big arguments where he's like, I just don't even know what I'm doing anymore. And I think for us, it's becoming friends with people and allowing them to open up to where they feel comfortable sharing. I mean, Peter Hurley has a great example of this. The first video we ever produced with him, he was telling himself, what is the one thing that I have that I cannot share with anybody? And it is how to pull expressions out of people. Yeah. I will show Patrick and Lee everything I do, but I can't really disclose that because I don't want everyone stealing that from me. And it took, you know, becoming friends with them. And then we said, let's produce this tutorial. It's all about the one thing you don't want to share with people. Yeah. And, you know, now we all have a great working relationship. We worked with Peter many, many times. And, you know, there's still some of those ego things. And I'll admit, you know, I'm sure Lee and I have an ego too now doing this so long. There's those times where you butt heads, but it's almost like being in a band, you know, like you have to be willing to listen to the drummer and listen to the producer who's not even in the band tell you maybe some new direction you should try, because once you find that formula for success and you're just calling it in, and you're Bon Jovi used to be one of my favorite bands. I'm sorry if this ever gets back to John Bon Jovi, but when you get to the point when you're like, man, the last 4 records, they just all sound like the same record. It doesn't feel like anything really new is happening there. One of my favorite artists of all times is Ryan Adams. Yeah. And he will produce an album. Every album sounds totally different. One sounds like the Grateful Dead. The next is a pop record. The next one is an indie punk record. Another one is an acoustic record that's just him. I really appreciate that. And I feel like, you know, a lot of what we do, I try to always go back to that and say, we can't keep doing the same thing. We need, if we want to work with somebody again, we need to find something else that they've never shared, or maybe share a part of their career that they've evolved into that's different. And so those are kind of the challenges that I feel like I deal with working with other creatives kind of in the capacity that we do.